You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. The year 1776 began on a high note for George Washington and the Continental Army when they saw the British leave Boston in March. However, things didn't go as planned in New York City. Despite their efforts, British General William Howe, with his forces, landed on Long Island in August and successfully ousted Washington's troops from New York by mid-November, even taking the remaining soldiers on Manhattan. For the winter, the majority of the British forces settled back in New York, leaving their Hessian allies, led by Colonels Rall and von Donop in New Jersey. These colonels received orders to set up smaller posts around Trenton. Meanwhile, General Howe sent Charles Cornwallis and his men across the Hudson River to pursue Washington and his army all the way across New Jersey. With enlistments ending and desertions on the rise, Washington's military numbers were dwindling, and the morale of the troops was low from their recent losses around New York. Most of Washington's men retreated across the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware River near Trenton and made sure to take or destroy boats along the river to hinder pursuit. Cornwallis, acting on Howe's commands, didn't immediately continue the chase after Washington. Instead, he stationed his troops in a string of outposts that spread from New Brunswick to Burlington in New Jersey, including those at Bordentown and Trenton. They hunkered down there for the winter. The British commanders welcomed this break as it was a chance to rest, get more supplies, and plan for the battles they would face when the warmer weather returned. George Washington set up his Continental Army near McConkey's Ferry, close to where they would cross the Delaware River. Initially, Washington stayed across the river from Trenton, but by December 15th, he had moved headquarters to William Keith's house in Upper Makefield Township to be nearer to his troops. At the time they reached McConkey's Ferry, Washington's forces numbered between 4,000 and 6,000 men, but sadly, around 1,700 were too sick to fight and required hospitalization. During the challenging retreat across New Jersey, the army not only lost supplies but also lost contact with two significant divisions. Among Washington's generals, Horatio Gates and Charles Lee were in positions that might have supported the crossing and subsequent attack. Gates was in the Hudson River Valley, but was held up by heavy snow, and Lee, who was critical of Washington, ignored orders and stayed near the British in Morristown with his troops. Washington's army faced other issues too. Many soldiers were nearing the ends of their service and considering leaving, some even deserted early. These troubles, along with a string of defeats, the loss of New York, and the retreats that followed, made some in Congress question if the war was headed in the right direction under Washington. Despite these doubts, Washington continued to gather supplies and attract new recruits for his army, partly because of the British and Hessian soldiers' poor behavior in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. The abandonment of Fort Lee hit Washington and his troops hard. They were forced to leave behind important supplies and munitions. This, along with the loss of many soldiers either killed or captured, deeply affected the remaining soldiers' spirit. Few believed that Washington and his army could come out victorious. As the Continental Army faced low morale, Thomas Paine's pamphlet, The American Crisis, published on December 19, 1776, brought some hope with its memorable words. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Washington thought so highly of this message that he made sure his troops heard it the day after it came out in Philadelphia. Paine's words encouraged soldiers and the public alike to believe in the possibility and necessity of victory, despite the challenges they faced. As for reinforcements, on December 20th, General Lee's troops, now led by General John Sullivan after Lee was captured by the British, joined Washington. Gates' forces arrived as well, although reduced to just 600. Then an additional 1,000 soldiers from Philadelphia, commanded by Colonel John Cadwalader, bolstered Washington's army. After counting everyone, including local volunteers, Washington had about 6,000 fit soldiers. However, some were assigned to guard duties, reducing the number of men who could take part in an attack to around 2,400. The morale improved further when provisions, including vital blankets, arrived on December 24th. When George Washington arrived in Pennsylvania, he knew it was time for a bold move. With additional troops from Generals Sullivan and Gates and the influx of local militia, he felt ready to act. Initially, Washington considered attacking the southernmost British positions near Mount Holly, where there was a gathering of the Continental Army's militia. He sent Joseph Reed, his adjutant, to assess the situation with Samuel Griffin, the militia's leader. Reed reached Mount Holly on December 22nd to find Griffin was ill, and the men weren't in the best shape. However, they were up for causing a distraction. The very next day, they did just that at the Battle of Ironworks Hill, successfully luring the Hessians from Bordentown away from Trenton. Reed's intelligence led Washington to discard the Mount Holly plan and instead target the Hessian stronghold in Trenton. By December 23rd, Washington had decided to strike Trenton just before dawn on December 26th. He confided in Reed, stating a dire necessity for this hazardous undertaking, which involved crossing the Delaware River. The strategy included 3 crossing points. Washington would lead the main attack on Trenton. A second group, under Cadwalader, would cross at Dunk's Ferry to distract the enemy. A third, commanded by General James Ewing, would take Trenton Ferry to prevent the Hessians from escaping. If Trenton were captured, the Continental Army planned to move on to Princeton and New Brunswick. A 4th crossing was called off due to a lack of manpower. Preparations began immediately on December 23rd, and by Christmas Eve, boats were transported to the Delaware from Malta Island, near what is today New Hope, Pennsylvania. Concealed behind Taylor Island at McConkey's Ferry, where Washington intended to cross, these boats were meticulously secured. A final strategy meeting took place that same day, with all the general officers detailing their river crossing and assault on Trenton for Christmas. To cross the Delaware River, an assortment of vessels was collected, with contributions from the New Jersey and Pennsylvania militia and assistance from the Pennsylvania Navy. Washington appointed Captains Daniel Bray, Jacob Gearhart, and Jacob Ten Eyck to manage the crossing, which included relocating infantry, cavalry, and artillery. The fleet consisted of large ferries, capable of carrying stages, which were possibly used for the heavy artillery, and also Durham boats, designed for moving heavy cargo from the Durham ironworks. These vessels could navigate the shallow river and were steered by proficient boatmen. Notably, John Glover's Marblehead Regiment, composed of experienced mariners from Massachusetts, participated as part of the crew. These individuals, together with Philadelphia seamen, dock workers, and shipbuilders, as well as local ferry operators knowledgeable about the Delaware River, such as Rhode Island's Kirby Francis Kane, all played vital roles in the operation's achievement. On Christmas morning, George Washington got his troops ready. He told his men to pack up 3 days of food and to make sure their muskets had fresh flints. Washington had heard rumors that the British might try to cross the Delaware River once it froze, which had him concerned. By 4 p.m. on Christmas Day, his army was at the riverbank, ready to start crossing. Everyone, including officers and musicians, grabbed ammunition and muskets for a top-secret mission. They marched, 8 soldiers side by side, silently making their way to McConkey's Ferry. The goal was to start crossing the river under the cover of darkness to keep hidden, but they didn't get there until 6 p.m., way after the sun had set. The weather turned nasty. First, it drizzled, then it rained, and finally, it changed to sleet and snow. One of the soldiers later said it was like a hurricane. Washington tasked Henry Knox, who was responsible for the army's artillery, with managing the crossing. It was tough going, especially with the horses and heavy artillery to get across. Knox himself said they did it, but it was incredibly hard, especially with chunks of ice floating down the river. Some said the operation would have collapsed if Knox hadn't been so forceful and loud. The cold snap they were experiencing, along with the icy river, could be tied to what's called the Little Ice Age that happened during the 1770s. Washington was one of the first to make it to the other side, along with troops from Virginia led by General Adam Stephen. They formed a tight circle around the landing spot in New Jersey, and nobody was allowed through. Their secret password, victory or death. The rest of the soldiers crossed with no significant problems, although a few of them did end up in the icy water, including Delaware's Colonel John Hazlitt. Because of all the ice in the river, it took until 3 a.m. on December 26 for the artillery to finish crossing. By 4 a.m., the troops were lined up and ready to go. Meanwhile, other groups of soldiers had their plans disrupted by the nasty weather and ice. General Ewing couldn't even start to cross below Trenton, and Colonel Cadwalader managed to get his men across to New Jersey but couldn't bring his artillery over. He actually sent his men back. But when he heard about Washington's victory, he crossed again, only to retreat after finding Washington's forces had moved on from New Jersey. On the morning after Christmas, General George Washington quickly readied his troops and divided them into 2 groups. He led one group together with General Greene, while General Sullivan headed the second group. Washington's team took Pennington Road, a route inland from the Delaware River, while Sullivan's group traveled along River Road from Bear Tavern to Trenton. In the meantime, the Hessians were in Trenton, worn out from the minor battles and constant disturbances they faced leading up to Christmas. With the rough weather on Christmas night and heavy snow falling, their leader, Colonel Rall, didn't expect any significant attacks. Rall, along with some of his top men, spent the evening of Christmas at the house of Trenton's postmaster, Abraham Hunt. Hunt, acting as a loyal supporter of the British Crown, put on a good show with food and drinks that went on until late. This hospitality affected the Hessians' alertness. In contrast to Colonel Rall's assumptions, Washington launched a swift attack at dawn. Rall and his troops were caught off guard, quickly becoming disorganized and overpowered. The battle was a resounding victory for Washington's forces, with only 3 American soldiers killed and 6 injured, versus 22 Hessians losing their lives and another 98 injured. As the fight ended, Colonel Rall suffered serious injuries that claimed his life the next day. Washington's army managed to take around 1,000 prisoners and secure a significant amount of weaponry, including muskets, gunpowder, artillery, and drums. After their victory, George Washington and his troops faced the challenging task of crossing the Delaware River a second time. This crossing turned out to be even tougher than the first. Despite Washington's orders to destroy all the captured goods, his soldiers got into the rum they found among the plundered Hessian supplies, and some got drunk. As a result, more soldiers ended up being pulled from the icy waters of the Delaware during the return trip. Not only did they have to navigate the freezing river, but they also had to keep a close eye on the large number of prisoners they were taking across. One American guard noted the Hessians standing in the freezing water were shivering so much that their lowered jaws were trembling like an aspen leaf. The success of the battle greatly boosted the soldiers' spirits. The win cemented Washington's reputation as a leader, spurred the soldiers on, and reignited Congress's passion for the war effort. Just a few days later, on December 27th, during a war council, Washington received news that the enemy had pulled back to Princeton. This intelligence came from Cadwalader, who discovered it when his militia crossed the river earlier that morning. Cadwalader suggested in his letter that this could be an opportunity to push the British out of the area completely, which would be a significant win. After much discussion, the council agreed to proceed and planned another crossing for December 29th. Despite a snowstorm on December 28th, the weather eased up the following evening, though it remained bitterly cold. With most of the army involved, they used 8 different crossing points. The river conditions varied greatly. Some sections had ice thick enough to walk on, while other areas were so hazardous they had to postpone the attempt for a day. It wasn't until New Year's Eve that the entire army finally regrouped in New Jersey. This timing was quite important because the enlistment for many of the soldiers, including those in John Glover's regiment, was about to expire at the end of the year. A lot of these men were eager to return home to a more profitable endeavor, privateering. To convince them to stay with the army for another 6 weeks, they were offered immediate payment, a bounty taken straight from congressional funds in Philadelphia. Washington then took up a defensive position south of Assunpink Creek in Trenton. Here, on January 2nd, 1777, they successfully repelled an attack. This defense paved the way for a crucial triumph at the Battle of Princeton the next day, although it cost the life of General Hugh Mercer. Afterward, the British retreated to New Brunswick, and the Continental Army settled into winter quarters in Morristown, New Jersey. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.